Okay, I did this Planet of the Apes thing the other day, and I mentioned my second book that I have 7 chapters that are on, that I managed to recover from floppy disk, and the rest are paper. And what I need to do is have the motivation to basically hand type. There's like 30, maybe 40 chapters. So the majority of the book that's just on paper, I would have to hand type back onto my laptop to be able to get it so I can start rewriting again, because the paper version of it, and even the part that I salvaged off the floppy disk, aren't exactly at the level that they were when I had the final draft that I lost. So I would probably need to rewrite to get them back to publishable quality. Anyway, what I decided to do, I'm going to read chapter 1 and see if people even bother to, if I get a response, I might go ahead and start putting the chapters out there as far as just reading them, and see if people think that if there's potential here, what they think of the story. Maybe it's worth putting that kind of work in, especially since I'm not working right now and I have the time. After losing my husband and my marriage, I lost every last... Depression will do this to you. I lost every creative spark I had in me. I haven't been writing at all. I used to write sometimes a chapter a day. Okay, so this book is called Song of Mornius. I know I don't always enunciate well. The first word is song, S-O-N-G, Song of Mornius. And chapter 1. I wanted to add before I start reading that since I wrote this, I will be able to pronounce all the words. Not saying I'm going to read this with a whole lot of quality because I'm not a reader, but I will give it my best, especially since I wrote it. Okay, so again, Song of Mornius, chapter 1. And pardon me for the mouse clicking noises, because that can't be helped. Galen Laval tottered alongside the slumped cabin's exterior, his left hand clutching his staff Mornius. Blood, stiffening within his beard, tightened the skin of his lower lip. With his forearm he scrubbed at his mouth, then paused beside the cabin's front window. A salty stench bit his nostrils, overwhelming the scents of the forest. From inside the little cabin he caught the faint buzzing of flies. Trembling, he opened the gore-stained fingers of his right hand and let the broken axe fall. Wind harried the trees beyond the cabin, bending the stumpy bluebarks to its will. Still shivering, Galen lifted his staff. He thrust himself from the wall and from the only home he had known in his 19 years. Clad only in his worn tunic and oversized leggings, Galen plunged among the winter-glazed trees, driving himself headlong from the site of Seth Laval's murder. He fled into blue-gray shadow, cleaving bracken and rough greenberry, sobbing for breath as he raced below the reach of the midday sun. Downward he shambled, skidding, half falling through clove leaf, its berry clusters staining his torn sleeves a dark blue. A tree root stopped him, catching the toe of his boot. With a yell, he pitched forward, falling hard upon his elbows. Galen rolled, then sat trembling with legs spread. Through a haze of fatigue, he studied the trail before him, a narrow track stamped out by deer. He stared at the darkening bruise between his right thumb and forefinger. Again he felt the axe's worn handle in his hand, the weight of its head against his arm, the yielding resistance when its blade struck. With a shudder he raised his knees to his chest. They'll never find out, he vowed to himself. How could they? No one comes up here. Blue light pulsed from his staff lying beside him, from the sky-colored gem gripped by talons at Mornius's crown. Galen stared up from the leaves, trembling at the sudden warmth of power soothing his muscles, the clearing of mist from his sight. His staff rang hollow on the trail when he planted it, reminding him how close winter was. He lurched to his feet and again pressed forward, crashing through fern stalks as wide as his wrist. Bluebarks first, then king skies, he muttered as he went. Then winter whites at the mountain's base, and beyond them the city Kitterin. A place where they have streets, not trees. What are streets, I wondered, and what about its people? Galen stopped and shrank back. He pressed against the base of a tree, staring through its branches at the sky above. What if they hurt me, he whispered. That's a pretty walking stick you got there, boy. Galen, cowering behind his staff, raised his free arm to hide his face. Leave me alone. Now, said the smithy with a sneer. What's with all the blood, eh? You kill yourself a pig? Galen pressed against the livery's outer wall. His voice, when it came, was muted to his ears, drowned out by the throb of his heartbeat. I told you, he said. I've committed murder. My stepfather, Seth Laval. Why won't you report me? With a snort, the smithy stomped off. Trembling, Galen lowered his head. The citizens of Kitterin streamed by without stopping, their gazes averted, shielded from his plight. In their eyes he was a vagrant, starving and off his head, reeking of old blood. Only the rain failed to shun him. Cool and caressing, it washed through his hair. Leather creaked as a man crouched before him. Galen tensed, expecting the smithy. He focused on his arms, the pinkish rain sluicing over his wrists. The newcomer tapped his shoulder, speaking gently. Hard times in Kitterin, aren't they? Galen flicked his gaze upward to the stranger's face, then dropped his head. He studied his hands, the pale white gleam of his knuckles beneath his freckled skin. You'll freeze sitting out here. The man bent close, water trickling in rivulets from leather guards across his shoulders and arms. Why aren't you home? I don't have... Galen thumped his shoulders against the wall. I'm not... Again he made the attempt. Voice quivering, he described his crime, how he had taken Seth Laval's axe, and how, in blind fury and fear, he had hacked the older man to pieces. Leaning forward, the stranger probed his shattered cheekbone beneath his hair. Seth Laval did this? I'd no idea he had a stepson. Eyes closed, Galen nodded. You kept me hidden on Mount Deshea. Was this because you attacked him? Galen shivered. Numb from exposure as he was, he still felt hungry winter closing its teeth on late fall. No, he said gruffly. Then fingers caught his left wrist, pushing back the sleeve of his tunic. He shivered at the stranger's touch, how the man traced the scars along his forearm. These represent years, don't they? Again Galen nodded. Reaching out, he caught the stranger's hand. Please, can you make them listen? The enforcers won't even see me, and I can't go back home. We'll sort that out later, the man said. First things first, you'll catch your death out here. Hands both firm and gentle raised him to his feet. Galen tottered, but the larger man supported and turned him. As comrades, they stumbled through the rain. There now, said Tarek Florin. He settled back into his chair, placing the wet soiled cloth as far as he could from their bowls of hot stew. There you go. Galen glanced at Tarek across the table. In the tavern's yellow light, the man's eyes were hazel, not brown as he had first thought, filled with motes of fire, a fierce determination belying his kindness. Around them both other men pressed close, reeking of peasant roy and worse, the potato brew favored by his stepfather. Despite himself, Galen cringed. I had a friend near Kitterin, said Tarek, eyeing him, who kept something like a bear, a gracken from this world, that he raised from a cub. He gave it love enough to keep it gentle, but after he died, his younger brother took charge. Have you heard this story, Galen? Do you know what happened next? Galen shook his head. He didn't want to know. More and more men were crowding into the tavern. Trembling, he fixed his gaze on Tarek's bearded face, the angry flash of his gold-flecked eyes. The Gracken was starved, said Tarek, and neglected. Matar's brother had a cruel streak and liked to hear the beast howl. Then one day the Gracken ripped out Alandari's throat. I know, because I found him dead in their barn. Galen stared at the bloody rag on the table. Beside it steamed food he was loath to eat. Too long he had gone without. Was the Gracken destroyed? He asked, raising his voice over the tavern's noise. Tarek frowned, as if realizing how the point of his tale misfired. Galen lifted the spoon and rotated it slowly in his stew. Eat, said Tarek finally. Relax. You and I need to talk. About what? Galen stared at his food. With a practiced shake, he let his rust-colored hair drop forward across his eyes. Tarek paused, and Galen peered out at him from behind a matted tangle. Will you help me? Galen asked him. The enforcers here would listen to you. Tarek scowled. If you were stronger, I'd recruit you. I'm in sore need of men, Galen, be they judged criminals by the enforcers or not. You have no home and no place to go. I'd take you under my care if I could, but already I've too much to hinder me. For your own safety, I couldn't let... I understand, said Galen. I wouldn't want to be a burden. Let me finish. Tarek reached across the table, and Galen stiffened as the larger man smoothed back his hair. It's plain to me you're no warrior, Tarek said, and I'm headed to war, which means I'd be endangering your life by bringing you with me. Couldn't I help? Galen fingered his staff leaning against the table beside him. Don't you need camp hands? You're only a boy, Tarek said. You're what, 14? You've hardly any beard. 19, said Galen with a toss of his head. I'm 19. You've been imprisoned on that mountain all your life. Look at you, Galen Laval. You're frightened just sitting here. Have you never seen so many people? Trembling, Galen stared into the other's eyes. No, he admitted. I've never been to Kitterin before, or to any other place with people. Tarek nodded. Then it's no surprise you seem younger than your years, which leads me back to my problem. I've aided you with food, or I will, once you decide to eat it. So now what? How do I leave you behind, homeless as you are? Galen turned toward Mornius, and the blue stone flickered at its head. Across the table, Tarek Florin caught his breath. Reaching out, he looked first to Galen for permission, then touched the staff gently. This is old, Tarek breathed. And familiar. He fingered Mornius's gem within its cage of bird-like talons, then with his palm covered its restless light. It would clean up nicely, I think. Is it yours? Galen nodded. My father gave it to my mother the day he died. He was killed on the mountain, slain by my stepfather. You're the one with the army, right? Blurred a voice from behind Galen's back. Lordling Florin, inheritor of Veilhorse? Didn't you talk my brother Fevin into joining your little band? He's dead now, isn't he? Why else would he not come back with you? Tarek gestured with his hand for Galen to stay still. Then, standing, he thrust back his chair. Your brother had a mind of his own, Lars. Fevin Bodel wanted to fight. Death is coming for Kitterin, and he wanted to stop it. Death's coming, you say? Fist clenched, the other man staggered forward, and Galen shivered at the fury on his face. Seeing his fear, the man barked a laugh. For Kitterin. Is that what you told him? Is that what you're telling this boy here? Death is coming, or perhaps something worse, said Tarek, eyeing the drunk. Men aren't always killed, you know. Sometimes they're changed. Have you never seen a Wielerman, Lars? You think with your runt army you can make a difference? The man returned. What's your count up to now, lordling? 50, 60 men? Against what? Thousands? Perhaps. Tarek softened his voice. But at least we try, Lars. We make the effort. And I'd have more men trying if people like you weren't so... By convincing ignorant boys. Galen blinked as a second man launched himself at Tarek from behind. Larger than the first, he had circled round while Lars spoke. As Tarek went down under his doubled fist, two more armed fighters jumped in. Men surged to their feet, knocking over chairs and tables as they howled for blood. From a shadowed niche beside the bar, 5 men leaped to Tarek's aid. Clad in gray garments stained from travel, they waded like giants into the fray. As a group, they seized Tarek's attackers and threw them back. Heart-pounding, Galen bolted from his chair. Sounds of battle filled the little room, driving him cowering and trembling into a corner. Tarek, panting hard, clambered to his feet. He threw a jab at the largest man, then stiffened as his throat was caught. Holding him fast with one hand, his assailant drew his sword, and with deliberate slowness slit its blade through Tarek's stomach. 2 men threw themselves to Tarek's defense, hammering the wide back of his attacker. Ignoring them both, the swordsman bent over his victim, bracing Tarek while he viciously twisted the blade. With a low gasp, Tarek slid to the floor. Galen stared at the spreading pool around Tarek. Mornius pulsed in his hand, its blue fire flaring bright. As if from a distance, he watched himself dart across the wooden floor, then crawl beneath the shifting knot of fighters. He crouched at Tarek's side. From deep within Mornius he felt a presence silently commanding him, thrashing itself from slumber. With a hand still stained with murder, he gripped his staff. He felt the throbbing of his heartbeat, saw its rhythm echoed within the depths of Mornius's stone. Galen pressed at his ribs, at the aching pressure mounting in his chest. He felt his face go cold, the pulse stiffen in his throat. Grasping Tarek by his armpits, he hauled at the armored man's dead weight. "Hang on!" Galen yelled. Tendons burned in his shoulders as he pulled. Out the doorway he backstepped, dragging the wounded Tarek into the rain. Then he knelt. "You're filth, you know that?" came Seth Laval's voice from his past. "Worthless! Why I ever let you live this long, I have no—" Galen hammered his fist against the street stones beside Tarek, pounding until his fingernails bit into his palm's flesh. He shuddered while the pain cleared his head. Then he bent over Tarek, shielding him from the rain. "You listened," Galen told him. "You wanted to help me." As he raised up Mornius, the pressure in his chest shifted into his arm, then down to his fingers gripping the staff. "Your strength will come from the sea," whispered Tarek, his unseen gaze fixed on Mornius's radiant gem. "From an island, beyond the mountains." "From an island?" Galen pulled back to see his face. "What are you saying to me?" He broke off, gasping, as pressure forced his hand down, brought the weight of Mornius to bear against Tarek Florin's wound. Fire screamed from the staff, blasting silver from the stone. Eyes closed, Galen threw back his head, his body writhing against a power familiar and yet not. It was a force he had dreamed of throughout his childhood but never knew. Darkness came over him. He sensed himself falling. Dimly he felt the shock of his shoulders striking the paved street. He managed a breath. Then two. Arms slid beneath him. He raised his hands, struggling feebly as he was lifted. "Let me die," he murmured. "Please." "After you just saved me?" "No, I don't think so." Galen stiffened, recognizing Tarek's low voice, Tarek's soft chuckle above him. You're alive?" "Yes," said Tarek. "And you're a healer, I take it." "Good. Well, now I know." "Know what?" Reaching out his hand, Galen searched the darkness until strong fingers seized his own. Again Tarek chuckled. "What you might do for my army." That's the end of chapter 1, Song of Mornius. As me trying to read it.